In the aftermath of dissolution, when the prima materia of the self has been reduced to its most fundamental substance, when every illusion has been stripped away and the ego structure has undergone its necessary death, there emerges from the darkness a different quality of light. Not the harsh, burning illumination of solar consciousness that once dominated the psyche, but something softer, more lunar, more reflective. The alchemists called this phase the albedo, the whitening, and they understood it not as the end of the work, but as its crucial middle passage, the bridge between the death of what was and the birth of what might be. This is the revelation that comes after the nigredo, after the blackening, after the psychological death that precedes all genuine transformation. The albedo represents one of the most misunderstood phases of the alchemical opus, frequently dismissed as merely a transitional stage, or erroneously conflated with the final goal itself. Yet the medieval alchemists devoted enormous attention to this whitening process, encoding within their descriptions of material purification a sophisticated map of psychological rebirth. They spoke of washing the blackened matter, of repeated distillations, of the emergence of lunar consciousness from solar dissolution. Beneath these seemingly simple descriptions lies a profound understanding of how the human psyche reconstitutes itself after undergoing complete disintegration, how consciousness reorganizes around a new center after the old center has been destroyed. Jung recognized in the albedo what he termed the first stable form to emerge from the chaos of the unconscious, the initial crystallization of a new psychological structure. This is not yet the fully realized self, not yet the gold of the rubido, but it is no longer the undifferentiated darkness of the nigredo. The albedo represents purification through separation, the discrimination of what is essential from what is not, the careful distillation of authentic being from the dissolved mass of former identity. It is here that the true nature of the work becomes apparent, for the albedo reveals that transformation is not a matter of adding something new, but of removing everything false until only truth remains. The philosophical architecture underlying the albedo rests upon the hermetic principle of separation and conjunction, solve et coagula, taken through its first major cycle. The dissolution of the nigredo, the solving, must be followed by a reconstitution, a coagulation, but not a return to the previous form. The blackened matter must be washed, purified, separated into its constituent principles before it can be recombined in a higher form. This washing is not a single operation, but a repeated process, what the alchemists called the multiplicatio, the sevenfold washing, that gradually removes all impurities and reveals the essential nature of the substance. Psychologically, this manifests as the careful discrimination between what belongs to the authentic self and what was merely conditioning, projection, or identification with collective values. After the ego death of the nigredo, consciousness begins to sort through the remains, to separate genuine insight from inherited belief, authentic desire from imposed expectation, true nature from false persona. This is painstaking work, requiring a level of honesty and self-awareness that most individuals never achieve. It demands the willingness to question everything that survived the dissolution, to subject even cherished beliefs and valued aspects of identity to rigorous examination. The first stage of albedo purification involves what might be called the washing of the salt, the separation of the fixed from the volatile. In alchemical language, salt represents the body, the fixed principle, the material basis of existence. Psychologically, this corresponds to the fundamental patterns of being that persist even after ego dissolution, the deep structures of personality that are not merely conditioned responses but essential expressions of individual nature. The washing of salt means distinguishing these authentic patterns from the accumulated layers of false identification that had obscured them. This stage is characterized by a peculiar clarity of perception. The individual who has undergone the nigredo and emerged into the albedo often reports a capacity to see through social conventions, collective delusions, and personal self-deceptions with startling precision. This is not the harsh, judgmental clarity of the inflated ego, but a cool, lunar awareness that illuminates without burning, that reveals without destroying. It is the light of reflected consciousness, awareness aware of itself, thought that has learned to observe its own processes without immediate identification. The challenge of this first stage lies in maintaining the discrimination without falling into its shadow manifestation, a cold intellectualism that dissects everything but integrates nothing, that sees through all illusions but cannot affirm any truth. The temptation is to remain in the analytical stance, to continue dissolving and separating without ever allowing the coagulation that must follow separation. This produces the perpetual critic, the person who has transcended all values but established none, who can deconstruct everything but construct nothing. It is a form of spiritual sterility disguised as wisdom. The second stage of albedo purification involves the washing of sulfur, the purification of the soul principle, the volatile element that animates and quickens. In psychological terms, sulfur represents desire, passion, the driving force of the psyche. The nigredo dissolved not only false beliefs, but also false desires, the wants and wishes that were not truly one's own, but borrowed from culture, family, or circumstance. The washing of sulfur means reclaiming authentic desire, discovering what the soul genuinely longs for when it is no longer driven by ego inflation or collective pressure. This is perhaps the most delicate aspect of albedo purification, for desire itself must be approached with extreme care. The alchemists understood that sulfur, while essential, was also dangerous. Unpurified sulfur could reignite into the consuming flames of ego attachment, could recreate the very inflation and identification that the nigredo had dissolved. The washing process requires that desire be separated from attachment, that longing be distinguished from grasping, that authentic aspiration be freed from neurotic need. What emerges from this second stage is a quality the alchemists sometimes called the white rose, or the silver of the philosophers, a purified form of desire that seeks not possession but participation, not control but connection, not inflation but inspiration. This is desire that has been through death and no longer fears loss, that can want intensely without clinging desperately, that can pursue goals without making them conditions for self-worth. It represents a fundamental shift in the orientation of consciousness, from desire as grasping to desire as creative expression. The phenomenological experience of this stage often involves a surprising return of vitality and interest in life after the deadening darkness of the nigredo. Colors seem brighter, not with the manic intensity of inflation, but with a clear, crystalline beauty. The world becomes interesting again, but in a different way than before. Where previously meaning was sought in grand narratives or ultimate purposes, now significance is found in particular things, specific moments, the irreducible thisness of concrete existence. This is the lunar consciousness that sees by reflected light, finding meaning not by imposing interpretations, but by allowing things to reveal themselves. The third stage of albedo purification concerns the washing of mercury, the purification of mind itself, of consciousness as such. Mercury in alchemy is the most complex and paradoxical of the three philosophical principles, representing both the medium of transformation and that which must itself be transformed. It is the solvent that dissolves, the spirit that volatilizes, the messenger that carries influences between above and below. Psychologically, mercury corresponds to consciousness in its function as mediator between the conscious ego and the unconscious depths, between the known self and the unknown other. The washing of mercury means purifying consciousness of its distorting tendencies, its habitual patterns of projection and identification, its compulsive need to categorize and control. This is consciousness learning to hold opposites without immediately resolving them, to observe without judging, to know without possessing. It is the development of what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to maintain awareness while suspended between contradictory truths, conflicting desires, irreconcilable perspectives. This third stage represents the culmination of albedo purification, the point at which consciousness has been refined to such a degree that it can begin to serve as a vessel for integration rather than remaining an instrument of division. The individual who has completed this stage possesses what might be called psychological sovereignty, the ability to remain centered within themselves regardless of external circumstances or internal turbulence. This is not the rigid control of repression, but the flexible stability of genuine integration. The phenomenology of this third stage often involves experiences that the mystics would recognize, moments of witnessing consciousness in which awareness seems to step back from its contents without detaching from them, states of profound peace that are not the peace of absence but of perfect balance, insights that arrive not through reasoning but through a direct apprehension of pattern and meaning. These are the gifts of purified mercury, consciousness refined until it becomes transparent to itself. Yet the albedo, even in its completion, remains a lunar state. The light it provides is reflected, not generated. The consciousness it produces is receptive, not creative. The stability it offers is static, not dynamic. This is why the alchemists insisted that the whitening was not the final goal, why Jung emphasized that the albedo represents only a partial solution to the problem of the opposites. The silver must give way to gold, the moon to the sun, but a sun transformed by having passed through lunar consciousness, a solar awareness that has learned the lessons of receptivity and reflection. What prevents many individuals from progressing beyond the albedo is precisely its attractiveness, its seeming completeness. After the torment of the negredo, the clarity and peace of the whitening can seem like ultimate achievement. The purified consciousness of the albedo can perceive truth, discriminate authentic from false, maintain equilibrium in the face of chaos. Why pursue further transformation when such wisdom has been attained? This is the subtle trap of the white stage, the temptation to rest in a state that, while genuinely transcendent of ordinary consciousness, remains incomplete. The albedo lacks fire. It has the cool precision of lunar awareness, but not the generative heat that creates new forms. It can analyze and purify, but cannot synthesize and produce. The individual established in albedo consciousness possesses clarity, but may lack passion, understanding but not necessarily compassion, wisdom but perhaps not love. There is a certain coldness to the purified state, a quality of abstraction that, while transcending the chaos of unexamined life, also stands apart from the messy vitality of full human participation. Moreover, the albedo remains fundamentally a state of separation. The three principles have been washed and purified, but they have not yet been reunited. Salt, sulfur, and mercury exist in their refined forms, but remain distinct. Body, soul, and spirit have been clarified, but not yet integrated into a living whole. The opus is not complete until these separated and purified elements are brought back together in a new conjunction, until the whiteness gives birth to something beyond itself. This brings us to perhaps the most crucial understanding about the albedo revelation. It is not an end, but a beginning. Not a goal, but a preparation. The three stages of purification after psychological death ready the psyche for its final transformation, create the conditions under which the true miracle of the work can occur. Without the albedo, the rubido would be impossible. Without purification, the final reddening would simply recreate the old patterns in new forms, would be regression rather than progression, repetition rather than transformation. The individual who has completed the albedo stands at a threshold. Behind them lies the chaos of the nigredo, the death of the old self, the dissolution of every certainty. Before them lies the unknown territory of the rubido, the final transformation, the achievement of the philosopher's stone. But they stand on ground that is finally solid, within a consciousness that is finally clear, possessed of a discrimination that can discern truth from falsehood, essence from accident, authentic from false. This is the gift of the whitening, not completion but capacity, not arrival but readiness. The three stages of albedo purification produce a psyche capable of the final work, a consciousness refined enough to serve as vessel for the conjunction of opposites, a self purified enough to sustain the full intensity of integrated being. Without this preparation, the heat of the rubido would destroy rather than transform, would burn rather than refine, would produce inflation rather than individuation. The albedo teaches that transformation is not dramatic but methodical, not sudden but gradual, not a single breakthrough but a series of careful refinements. It reveals that psychological death is not the end of the work, but its beginning. That dissolution is not itself transformation, but creates the possibility of transformation. It demonstrates that consciousness must be purified before it can be fully activated, that the psyche must be cleansed before it can be consecrated. Those who undertake this work discover that the three stages of albedo purification demand qualities that contemporary culture rarely cultivates: patience to allow processes to unfold in their own time, discrimination to separate essential from accidental, honesty to acknowledge what is actually true rather than what is wished to be true, humility to recognize that clarity is not the same as completion. These are not skills that can be learned from books or acquired through practice. They are capacities that emerge only from having been through the fire of dissolution and the water of purification. The revelation of the albedo is ultimately this: that after death comes not immediate rebirth but careful preparation. That after dissolution comes not instant reconstitution but gradual purification. That after darkness comes not blinding light but gentle illumination. The whitening is the middle passage, the often overlooked but absolutely essential phase during which the psyche learns to sustain transformation without collapsing back into previous patterns or inflating into grandiose identifications. In the quiet laboratory of consciousness, where the work proceeds far from the noise of collective life, the albedo performs its patient ministry. The blackened matter is washed once, twice, 7 times. The volatile is separated from the fixed, the essence from the residue, the true from the false. Mercury is purified until it flows like living silver. Sulfur is refined until it burns with white heat. Salt is clarified until it crystallizes in perfect forms. And through these operations, invisible to outer eyes, but utterly transformative of inner reality, the psyche prepares itself for its final becoming. The silver that emerges from the albedo is not the gold that is sought, but it is no longer the chaos from which the work began. It is something both less and more than gold. Less because it lacks the creative fire of the rubido, more because it possesses a purity and clarity that even gold does not have. It is the necessary intermediate, the essential preparation, the middle term, without which no philosopher's stone could ever be achieved. And for those rare individuals who pursue the great work to its completion, the albedo remains forever precious not as a goal, but as a foundation, not as an end, but as a beginning, the white dawn after the black night that makes possible the red noon of full realization.